Yeah, Avril, the gun law part of the debate is perhaps the easiest part. I mean, there is a popular misconception internationally that guns are illegal in Australia. That's not correct. Just certain types of guns are. Sajid Akram, who was shot dead by police on Sunday, owned legally 6 firearms. He also a member of a gun club and held a firearms license. So that's led to a debate that perhaps gun laws need to be tightened. Perhaps those licenses should be reviewed periodically if circumstances change. In the case of Sajid Akram, circumstances did change. His son Nazim Akram, it turned out throughout the police investigation, was known to the spy agency ASIO in 2019 over potential Islamic State links. The other change to gun laws would be a limit to the amount of firearms any individual could own. That's getting widespread support from state and federal leaders, but what is going to be trickier is the approach towards anti-Semitism in the country. The Jewish community has been saying their repeated vocal concerns about something like this happening went unheeded. So far, Anthony Albanese has just said he stands with the Jewish community. He describes anti-Semitism as a scourge, but says now is the time for national unity. I want to get a little bit more on this and bring in our next guest. Jillian Segal is Australia's special envoy to combat anti-Semitism. Jillian, you were among the many people that were warning the government that something this tragic was potentially brewing. What's your message now?
Well, my message now, thank you for listening to this issue and featuring it. My message now to the government is, and to everyone in the community, that is, firstly, it's a time to come together. And the general community has been, in my perception, wrapping its arms around the Jewish community. We've all received amazing messages of support from all over. But secondly, as well as coming together, it's the time now to adopt, implement, support, and accelerate even the recommendations in my report. I prepared a report on anti-Semitism for the government and gave it to them in nearly 6 months ago, middle in July. And it had a whole series of recommendations, parts of the community to focus on and initiatives. And I've been working on delivering some of those, but I think it could do with a great deal more effort and acceleration. And that's what I'm hoping I will hear from the government soon.
Yes, well, some of the initiatives you mentioned in your report were to do with measures around education, greater awareness, education about anti-Semitism, the history of the Jewish people. Other elements were a little bit more controversial. For example, requiring universities to have a report card around anti-Semitism and tying that to funding. Do you think that that's really a workable option, or do you need to find some areas to compromise?
Well, firstly, that's not quite the way it's framed in terms of the working with universities comes out of a joint parliamentary committee that was commissioned to look at anti-Semitism at universities, and they made a series of recommendations, which I've been working with universities on, and I've appointed an independent person to conduct a review of how they've gone against those recommendations of amending their policies and training about anti-Semitism and complaint schemes and so on, and that will be the subject of a report card. I never recommended that the tying of funding be to the report card. What I had said was, if universities, or a particular university, was absolutely recalcitrant and did not cooperate and did not see this as an issue, government should look at funding, nothing to do with me. And so that still awaits as an issue. But my perception is that the universities in different ways have taken this issue very seriously. And certainly the larger universities where most of the Jewish students are have taken it very seriously. And I don't expect that to be an issue. But clearly, where there's teeth in any of the recommendations, it's up to the government to find ways to enforce it. That may be something that they can comment on in their response. But the fundamentals of fighting anti-Semitism through education, both at universities and at schools and in the community through the corporate understanding and in the public sector, are the fundamental issues, because it's a hatred that is, as the Prime Minister says, an ancient hatred, an evil hatred, and a particular scourge. And it's not just general racism. It is based on myths and tropes, and we need to counter them.
Jillian, as we understand it, you spoke to the Prime Minister on Monday. What was the tone? Did he sound receptive to some of these proposals that you're pushing through?
Well, I think the Prime Minister on Monday was in as much shock and disbelief as, many people were that something like this could happen in Australia, and he was incredibly upset. But I have been working constructively with different ministers, Minister of Education, Minister of Home Affairs, in pursuing some of the recommendations in the plan. So I think he is receptive to the plan as a whole, but people have been calling for a sort of general statement of support and an acceleration of that. And that's what I'm hoping we should hear from him about soon.
Jillian, I wonder if you could also weigh in. I mean, among the debates as well in this very serious issue of addressing anti-Semitism is how to distinguish that and perhaps criticism against genocide or racism. What is your take on this?
Well, I think we need to deal with an understanding of hatred and racism generally in every community. We have a range of organisations that have gone into schools and into the community to deal with those issues. And our Australian Human Rights Commission has an excellent framework to look at hatred and racism generally. So I think that's a necessary part of a multicultural country so that we can try and understand each other and not be racist. But anti-Semitism is a particular age-old hatred that goes back millennia, and that is not just simple racism, if I could ever use that term, but is something based, as I said, on historical myths about Jews. And I think to really counter anti-Semitism, we need to understand those myths and where they come from, and that they, in fact, are myths and not truths. So that's why we need specific education about anti-Semitism. So we sort of need a layer, I use the term a layer cake of education, fundamental education about values and about ethics and racism, and then historical contexts about the Holocaust and the way Jews were treated there, and then anti-Semitism. Yep.